Is there any relevance of native speaker norms? That's a question for TEFLologists. Is it better to focus on form or to focus on forms? That's a question for TEFLologists. If you use a textbook, is your classroom authentic, or should your approach be more learner-centric? From feedback to learner autonomy, we'll discuss it all on TEFLology.
Hi, Matt.
No, you're not.
Are we changing your name now?
Is it recording?
Yeah, it's still going.
Hi, I'm Matthew.
I'm Rob.
And I'm Matt.
And welcome back to the TEFLology Podcast, a podcast all about teaching English as a foreign language and related matters, presented by three self-certified TEFLologists.
TEFL News.
So for this week's TEFL news, I'd like to talk about, well, it's kind of some, I guess, personal news.
Okay. It's an event that happened recently.
An event that happened recently in my life, but don't worry, I'm not dying or anything. It's not that kind of personal
I wouldn't
news.
be worried.
I just thought I recently went to a conference. My news section today is basically my 4 take-homes from the conference.
Okay.
The conference I went to is the Pansig conference, which took place in Akita in the northern part of Japan.
Okay. Can you explain what Pansig refers to?
Yeah, so Pansig, so it's like the Jout conference.
Can you explain what Jout is?
Jout is probably the biggest national teaching conference that there is in Japan.
Well, the Jout is the association,
It's the Japanese Association of Language Teachers.
Yep.
Mm. And the Pansig is a Jout conference.
Yeah. So within Jout there are various SIGs, special interest groups.
That's right.
How many SIGs are there, roughly?
Probably about 20, 20 to 25.
For example?
For example, there's the Teacher Development SIG, which I'm a part of, the Learner Development SIG.
Yeah. College and University Educators SIG, Global Issues in Language Education SIG, Gender Awareness in Language Education SIG.
And there's also another SIG that I'm going to talk about in my section today. Mm-hmm. So this conference is more of a kind of a gathering of
all the SIGs.
All the SIGs.
They're coming together, you could say.
And a lot of the sessions are kind of categorized into SIG interests. So for example, there'll be one room over the weekend that is solely dedicated to teacher development based presentations and so on. Mm-hmm. And it's a little more low-key. I found it to be friendly. I got to know a lot of people there. The Jout National, there's like 3 times as many people. And it's a bit more difficult to see everything and get to know people. So this was better for these reasons. The theme of the conference was expand your interests.
Okay.
And very broad and often very corny, but I want to relate my news section to how I expanded my interests.
Okay.
Okay.
It's pretty corny.
As sad as it
You're a member of which SIG?
I'm a member of the Teacher Development SIG.
Yeah. So the idea is that you're a member of the Teacher Development SIG, but you went there to become interested in other
SIGs.
Yeah,
that's right, and that's the first point I want to talk about. So today I want to talk about the 4 things that really stuck with me from the conference and made me kind of want to find out more. And one of them was the SIG called Teachers Helping Teachers.
Okay.
THT.
Do you sounds like a drug.
Yeah.
THT.
Do you know about this SIG? Have you heard about their work?
No.
So what it is, this is a group of teachers who, what they do is they basically go into other countries and help out local teachers in their countries. And it's kind of an exchange of, I guess, teaching ideas across borders, across countries.
Yeah.
So they go into places such as, a couple of examples on their website, Bangladesh, Laos, the Philippines, Vietnam, and I can't say this country, Kyrgyzstan. Am I saying that correctly?
I don't know.
Okay. So they go into perhaps smaller countries and they help out local groups of teachers, and it's all voluntary. Of course, you have to pay to go on the trip. So the Teachers Helping Teachers SIG arranges trips into these countries.
Right.
And you have to obviously pay the SIG to go on the trip, and it's partly travel, partly work, I guess.
Okay.
And
you said it was like an exchange. Is it an exchange in that they're getting things from the local teachers as well, or is it more of a unilateral thing?
Well, this is something I wanted to ask, which I didn't quite find out, but in a couple of the presentations I saw, they talked about the type of things that they've taught the teachers in their countries. Like they go in teach them things like how to do like very basic things like gap fill activities, how to present language, teacher talk, like very practical stuff. But there didn't seem to be much coming in the other direction, other than I guess the culture itself.
Right. Did they say much in terms of like how they choose the locations that they go to?
And they must have links with those countries. There must be either local volunteer groups that they've linked up with. Maybe they have friends that work in those countries.
Right.
I'm not sure.
It calls to mind, was it Kanagaraja's talk at JALT a few years ago?
Yes.
Talking about like the American, language experts coming to his town and telling them how to teach.
Yes, yeah. That's based on an article that he did for TESOL Quarterly in 2012, which is worth a read. I recommend it to our listeners. Yeah.
If it is just one way, I'd like to think that there is more kind of flexibility, and it's not like this is how you should be doing things. And hopefully it's a bit more two-way.
Right.
Yeah. But it seems incredibly positive, and I'd love to go out to one of these countries. They do trips throughout the year for around 2 weeks at a time.
Yeah.
It's part travel, part imparting your knowledge, your experience to these teachers.
Would you go to Kyrgyzstan?
I'd love to, yeah. Like there was a guy called his name was, I might be getting this wrong, Robert Palmer.
Okay. Isn't he in Led Zeppelin?
Robert Palmer. That's Robert Plant. Yeah.
Okay.
And he kind of just gave an overview of the country, what teachers in the past have gone to do there and things like that. So it seemed like an incredibly positive thing, which I'd like to do.
Yeah, I mean, just from the perspective, or just the idea of going and seeing, how English is taught in different contexts, even without the, oh, by the way, here's how to do a gap fill. I'd like just to see,
Yeah. Well, the exchange, I think the idea of an exchange is interesting, definitely. Yeah.
So that was my first thing that really kind of stuck with me from the conference. The second one was a talk I went to about colour blindness.
Okay.
Now, I went to this talk because I'm kind of interested in teaching learners with special educational needs, and this presentation was kind of billed. Actually, it didn't mention colour blindness in the title of the presentation. It did mention SEN learners. So I went along thinking this is going to give an overview of all kinds of different learning difficulties that learners might have. But the guy just focused on colour blindness. But it was really interesting, actually.
Okay.
And this is something that I've never considered when teaching a class. Using colours on a PowerPoint, even chalk on the board causes problems. So he basically just kind of compared and he's colourblind himself, this guy, he's a Japanese guy, and he said, here's what I'm seeing now and here's what you're seeing, and can you see what the problems are? And he kind of talked about when learners are asked to find particular colours, when teachers are giving feedback, or when teachers are even presenting things on PowerPoint, this is what you should be aware of. And he kind of gave us some solutions. He went into the science of being colourblind. We had a discussion afterwards, and I sort of raised the issue, like, as teachers, do we have to be sensitive of, like, talking about colour? Because there's a lot of idioms and phrases that need colour in order to be understood. So
seeing red.
That kind of thing. So we talked about that, and he hadn't considered that point. So
kind of language sensitivity.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. Was he kind of proposing that we ask students, we try to get the information?
I think he was just trying to raise awareness. Because he just said in general, look around this conference, how many presentations have dealt with SEN learners, and there was only like his and maybe someone else. So he was just generally kind of saying, we need to be more aware, we need to be more kind of open, because a lot of the time the learners aren't going to say anything. And like I'm sure I've taught colourblind learners in the past, but they've never brought it to my attention. So this is something I'm going to go back to the classroom and maybe beginning of semester say, does anyone have any trouble with seeing colours, or in a different way perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if no one's coming to you and saying this is a problem for me, whether it's something that they feel that is a problem,
Yeah, but there probably are some students who wouldn't say anything even though it was.
That's true.
But also maybe have over their 18 years or however many years of education have built up ways of overcoming this particular.
Yes. Maybe they wouldn't want attention being drawn to it.
So actually, this talk was probably one of the most interesting that I saw, actually. And I came away with it with, this is interesting, actually. The third point was something that I was kind of involved with, and this is a colleague's project she's been working on. It's Anna Losavers, a former guest host of
friend of the podcast.
Show, friend of the podcast. And she talked about her experience with keeping a journal. A teaching journal, but the difference with her journal was that it was a dialogic journal, whereby she was keeping this journal online on Google Documents, for example, and somebody else, me in this case, had the chance to question her thoughts in her journal and basically help her to see more about her classroom. So we kind of, I went along to that presentation, obviously being a participant in the study, and it was received really positively. To my knowledge, I don't think there's been much done or written about dialogic journaling.
Okay.
Maybe there has in terms of two or more people reading each other's journals and talking about it, but an actual living online thing that two people have access to and are editing and questioning each other. Don't think that's been done to my knowledge, so that's something that we're going to maybe work on. Finally, just moving on, was I went to a self-access forum, and this was kind of the big kind of this kicked off all of the events at the conference, this big forum related to self-access. The university we were at has a very big, like physically big self-access centre.
Which university was it?
It's Akita International University.
Okay, that's quite a famous one.
Yeah, and it's ginormous, a great big kind of oval-shaped building, and it's just full of books, full of DVDs. So we kind of talked about what self-access is, how to set up a self-access room, how to maintain it, how to encourage students to use it, and basically what is self-access, essentially. I didn't really
Did they
know
give much information about their self-access centre?
There was a guided tour of the place, which I didn't go on, but I looked at it myself. But we had the chance to kind of listen to other people and hear their experiences. I kind of talked about my experiences with my new job. But I don't really have much to say other than it was interesting. It was interesting to find out more.
I was wondering about self-access centres. I feel like behind the scenes is probably a lot of effort has to be put into encouraging students to use it. It seems like it could easily, I've heard of many universities setting up their extensive reading libraries and then closing them after a couple of years. Students to use them.
But I mean, how could you encourage people or students to go to these or to take advantage of these resources? Could you put it in your class? Like, you have to go a certain number of times. That kind of thing?
That's one option, I think. Yeah, but then you have people going there who are kind of
it's not really self-access at that point, is it?
Right.
No.
Yeah. So, but does it have to be literally self-access?
But it got me thinking about your interview, Matt, with Higher Reinders. He basically said that everything... he kind of said, like, by the end, very soon, we won't need classes and all learning is self-access.
Yeah, I don't think so. That's just my opinion.
It got me thinking about that too, to the other extreme, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, it depends a lot on a level of motivation that even students who really want to learn English don't have. So.
So that's 4 ways that I expanded my interests at PANSI.
Okay, nice.
Okay, so that's my section.
TEFL Pioneers. Today's TEFL pioneer is Eilhard Lubinus. Yeah, I'm not going to ask if you've heard of him because you obviously haven't. So he was born in 1565 in Germany, and he was a map maker actually, a cartographer.
Okay. Thank you.
But he was actually a bit of a polymath. So he was a professor of philosophy, mathematics, literature, and theology. And theology is actually the point that's most relevant for what we're talking about. Interestingly, so he's quite a minor figure in a way, but he had some interesting ideas and he had quite a lot of influence on an important figure. So in 1617, he made his big contribution to language learning when he published a trilingual edition of the New Testament. Right? What languages do you think he was translating into?
into?
Oh, well, what do you think were the three languages? Latin.
German.
English.
No.
Greek.
Yeah, I didn't check.
Welsh.
Welsh.
Probably Latin would be there.
Yes, yeah.
Sure.
I think Latin was one of them, definitely. And in fact, in the preface of this trilingual edition of the New Testament, he wrote a discourse against the contemporary methods of teaching Latin, which is kind of a strange thing to put in a New Testament, I guess. But if you're using the New Testament to teach English, which I guess to teach Latin, which I guess a lot of people were, then kind of makes sense. And so he had two main ideas, which I think are quite interesting, and they're both connected to the psychology of learners. So he was one of the first people to talk about the psychology of learners. So the first idea that he had was connected to using pictures to teach language, essentially.
Okay.
So he said that children could learn words more easily if they could see a picture of the word they were learning at the same time. And his direct quote was, "All things which can be perceived by the sense of the eyes, described or imagined, ought by some sure way to be shewed to children and set before their eyes."
Right.
Yeah. So, well, first of all, what do you think about that?
Show pictures to children.
In conjunction with the words they're learning.
Learning styles. This is for visual learners.
I don't think I was going for. I mean, I see this as kind of the starting point for things like flashcards. Actually, is what I was thinking of. Those with the pictures on it.
Yeah. Reminds me a lot of the
Realia.
Like I think it comes like semiotics. Is that right? The sign and signifier.
Right.
And like René, do you remember René Magritte, the French?
Sure.
Was he French or Belgian? He was from Belgium, I think.
Maybe.
Where he his art was like a picture of a chair or the word chair and then a picture of a horse.
Okay.
And just saying that sometimes
this is not a pipe.
Yeah, that kind of thing. So that's probably why, I don't know. It just reminded me of that.
Right. Yeah.
Linking the message, the word, to an image, that kind of thing.
I mean, it sounds like a sort of commonsensical thing. Like if you're going to teach cat, you show a picture of a cat. I don't know what's behind it, really.
Well, it sounds commonsensical, but I wonder how much is common sense influenced by what we experience. Yeah?
Sure.
Like I remember when I was doing my CELTA, the tutor asked me, how would you teach the word newspaper to a student? Oh, sorry, not newspaper, newsagent. That was a newsagent. And I gave this long talk about, first I'd present it to them in the context of a sentence, then I'd get them to, and all this kind of thing. And he said, yeah, that's good, but why don't you just show them a picture of a newsagent?
Right, exactly. That is the most commonsensical.
Right. It is, but it didn't seem commonsensical to me at the time.
Yeah.
That was the thing.
Yeah. You're overthinking it, though.
Right, okay. So that was his kind of first idea, was that things should be presented with pictures.
Was your CELTA tutor Eilhard Lubinus by any chance?
He was. He lived a long and storied life.
Yes.
He ended it in Newcastle. And so that was his first kind of idea. His second main idea was to do with classroom management. Yeah, and this is something that hasn't really come up with our pioneers very much.
Yeah.
So he believed that the teacher should be loved by students, but were instead feared by their students. And this was because he thought
he thought they should be loved.
He thought they should be loved
rather than feared.
Rather than feared. Yes. Yeah. Why do you think students might have been afraid of their teachers?
Yeah, I mean I think maybe we've talked about it before. I'm not sure in what context it came up, but it seems like even like I'm reading, I read children's books to my children, as you would expect. But even books that are 30, 40 years old, the teacher characters are always big, scary characters.
Yeah.
And the kids are scared of the teachers. And that seems to be a thing right up until, 20 years ago.
I wonder how he would depict a teacher if he had to, as a booming, large kind of...
I mean, it feels like that seemed to be the prevailing pedagogy, is the teacher kind of makes themselves imposing and the students are scared into learning something.
Right. There's loads of reasons why you'd be scared of a teacher. You don't want to make mistakes. You want to get your grades.
Right.
You don't want to upset.
But the teacher could easily try to mitigate that.
Yeah.
It seems like they didn't always do that.
Yeah, but I mean, as we've discussed before, when we looked at like what was his name, Alfric of Einsham, whatever, where he had the students talking to the teacher, and they were like, "Oh, if we make mistakes, you're going to beat us," that kind of thing. So I think the image of the teacher at this time was very much this, as you were saying, a kind of a strict teacher who would engage in things like corporal punishment if the students misbehaved or made mistakes.
Yeah.
So Eilhard Lubinus' suggestion was that, well, he had three. First, corporal punishment should be replaced with psychological punishment.
Still punishment.
It's still punishment, but I think rather than hitting a student, being disappointed in them.
Okay, yeah.
That kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think like negging them or something.
Is that?
Do you know negging?
No.
It's part of the pickup artist thing. It's where you kind of, I don't know. It's where you're like rude to someone in order to make them like seek your approval. I believe.
Right.
I'm not an expert.
It's in that book, isn't it? That famous.
It's in that trilingual edition of the New Testament.
No, that famous pickup book.
The
game.
The
or
game.
Something?
Yeah.
It's one of the chapters in there.
Right.
So I'm told.
So that was his first idea: replace corporal punishment with psychological punishment. His second idea was that to motivate students in class, teachers should encourage friendly competition among students. What do you think about that?
I think a bit of competition is good if there's a pedagogical need for competition. So like the other day I was trying to get my students to use as many different phrases as possible. So I said, well, the last class managed 9 different phrases. So can you do better than that? And they did. They got 14. And in the next class, they got 14. Do better, and they didn't. But that was the top.
Right.
But there was a pedagogical need to kind of get them to do more.
Right.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Yeah. My German A-level teacher, after our weekly quiz, he would rank us. And he would refer to us by our ranking for the rest of the week.
Oh, really?
So he wouldn't use our names. He'd say, okay, number 1, what do you think of that? Number 9, do you have any ideas?
Isn't this a Dickens book? Isn't it?
I don't know. It happened in my...
Girl number whatever describe a horse.
Could be.
Yeah.
But he did it, he did it in a slightly... He was a big, scary teacher who, until he was our German A-level teacher, we were terrified of. And then we saw... It was a small class, and we saw the kind of nicer side of him. But he did it in such a way that it wasn't... We didn't resent number 1 or number 10 or whatever.
Okay, it wasn't demeaning.
It wasn't... No, somehow he didn't make it demeaning.
Okay.
It should have been, but it wasn't.
Did people move around the
Yeah. I mean, like, number 1 and number 2 probably stayed the same, and the bottom... bottom 2 probably stayed the same. And
sorry, I wonder if the bottom 2 have the same perspective.
Maybe not.
So I think maybe it's quite an interesting idea, especially at this time in the 1600s, introducing competition and focusing on the psychology of children. And his third idea, it's something that we've come across quite often, was that grammar teaching through the inculcation of rules should be abandoned, essentially. But the reason that he said this was that, so he said words should be introduced with pictures. He also said that words should be introduced in the context of sentences because A, it made them easier to remember, and B, words in a word list are restricted to just one grammatical form. So he thought if you present them in context, the grammar would follow. That naturally the students would pick up on the grammar.
So you'd have a sentence like, I saw and then a picture of a cat, and then I saw 2 and 2 cats.
Well, I think you'd have the word as well, but you'd have the picture in conjunction with the word. Yeah. And then they would maybe understand, okay, so what's different between these two things are the S, so that means more than one, and so on. Yeah. So those were his main contributions, this focus on the psychology of the child. So he was quite a minor figure in himself. This was his only contribution to language learning. But his focus on psychology was quite influential, and particularly he was a very big influence. I think he was one of the main influences on a previous pioneer. Can you guess who? Someone we've already discussed.
The German guy from the 17th century.
Vital.
Not Wilhelm Vital.
Wilhelm. Yeah.
No.
It was a bit later.
No. It was Jan Comenius.
I was gonna guess Comenius.
Were you gonna guess Comenius? Yeah.
Yeah, because I just met somebody from the university Comenius.
Oh, really?
In Slovakia.
Ah, very interesting.
Yeah.
Nice. So he was a big influence on Comenius, and Comenius, of course, is considered one of the great geniuses of language teaching.
Yeah.
If there is such
Especially
a thing.
in the yeah.
Yeah.
I can't remember that episode.
It was a really good one. You should listen to it, and so should all
Was
our
I there?
listeners.
It's our only Czech pioneer.
Okay.
Yeah. Nice. So unfortunately, Eilhard Lubinus died in 1621, just 4 years after he released his trilingual New Testament. But I think we can say that he had quite a strong legacy in language teaching, even if he himself isn't a particularly recognised figure. So that's our TEFL pioneer for this week, Eilhard Lubinus. TEFL cultures.
Today's TEFL culture is an aspect of our jobs that we've all had to deal with, but which I did a quick sort of Google Scholar search on it, and nothing came up at all, which surprised me. But it's the idea of job interviews.
Right.
Are you surprised that nothing came up? Are you surprised that no scholarly articles seem to have been written about TEFL job interviews?
TEFL job interviews?
Yeah.
No. I'd imagine there'd be some scholarship about job interviews in general.
Ah, yeah, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But nothing about TEFL job interviews.
Well, that's such a broad thing, though. TEFL job interviews.
Was it a very narrow thing? I thought.
No, it's too broad. I mean, there's so many different types of
Right.
teachers. You know?
That's true. For example?
For example, you know, obviously there's teachers that work in schools. There's private sector teachers, university teachers. So I guess all the interviews are different.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if there is a unifying kind of theme.
Right. I mean, there doesn't have to be a unifying theme necessarily, but just...
Right.
I was expecting some literature on, aspects of...
Yeah, I mean, that is interesting. I mean, because it ties in a lot with, like, teacher identity, I guess, and the way that you talk about yourself as a teacher. Teacher cognition, that's a whole area.
I wonder how much it ties into teacher identity and how much it's more about editing yourself to be what the interviewer wants you to be, or what you think they want you to be.
Okay. So I was going to start by asking you any, like, memorable experiences you have about interviews, but I'm not going to.
Okay.
Because maybe just like addressing some of the topics that I thought we'd talk about, I imagine maybe some stories will emerge.
Okay.
Possibly. But anyway, maybe starting with common interview questions, or questions that you feel have come up a lot in TEFL job interviews that you've been part of.
One question or a question starter, how would you...
Yes.
What would you do in this situation?
Different scenarios in the
how would
classroom.
you teach this language point, for example?
Okay.
What would you do in this situation? That kind of thing.
Related to that, like, do you have any experience of blah blah blah? So I've had a couple of times. Do you have any experience of mentoring a colleague, like a new colleague? Do you think
that question's asked because they want to know if, like, we want somebody to do that, or just to kind of get a sense of what kind of teacher you've been? Or
I think it can be both. Because I think when they were asking me that, I think it was kind of summing me up for if that kind of thing were to happen in the future, if they could rely on me to do it. And I think it was also like, how open are you, how flexible are you to do extra tasks, that kind of thing.
I think maybe not a question, but something that always happens, especially in Japan, is some sort of teaching demonstration.
Yeah.
So there'll always be questions related to why did you do that? Why did you do that kind of thing?
Yeah. Most of the jobs, or maybe not most, but maybe like half of the teaching jobs I've done required some kind of teaching demonstration. Do you think that's a good thing to do in an interview?
I mean, maybe it would be a better indication of your teaching if you submitted a video of yourself teaching, because you're nervous.
Yeah, and usually it's like they've got teachers for you to do the teaching practice with
students.
Yeah, which I'm not a huge fan of. Especially, like, I did one interview where the teachers they got in were all going to be my future colleagues, and they obviously didn't want to be there, and they were like making fun of the lesson and stuff, and it was a bit, it's very off-putting.
I remember doing an interview in London for a now defunct language school, I'm happy to say, in Japan. And they basically had me out of the door in 10 minutes. They decided I wasn't for the job, and you're out the door. You do your teaching demonstration 5 minutes. She asked me like 2 questions, and then she was like, okay, yeah, that's it. You can't make it through to the next round.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and now they're out of business. They weren't getting the right teachers. That's probably not the reason, but...
Yeah, whereas the first language school I applied to gave me a phone interview, which I didn't realise was an interview.
Is this the one you were in your underwear?
I was in my underwear watching morning cartoons, and they phoned me up, and I answered the phone. I did and it was just a guy who said, "Oh, I'm from Company X, and I'm just going to ask you some questions." And I said, "All right." And he asked me a few questions, and I answered them. And I got a lot of it wrong. Like he asked me, he asked me about concept checking questions. And I remember the example. It was he struggled to open the door. I was like, what concept checking questions could you ask about that? And I couldn't think of anything at the time. And I was, a bit hungover as well. And then, so he asked a few questions, then he said, "Okay, well, you've passed the interview." And I said, "Was that an interview?" And I got the job. And 8 years later, here I am.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I've done in terms of teaching demonstrations, I've done ones where, had to teach full, activity, or I've also done ones where they just said, okay, here's a bit of grammar, here's a class profile. Like you have half an hour to write a lesson plan, basically,
right.
And then just talk them through that.
Okay.
Which kind of makes as much sense to me as maybe getting somebody to teach something.
Yeah.
For one organisation, I did a whole 90-minute lesson.
Oh, really? With real students?
This was after the interview. We did the interview. I think in the interview there may have been a little give a kind of an informal talk through of a lesson, but then after you passed that, you had to do a whole maybe 1 hour lesson.
Yeah.
You had to do that. I didn't. I got in before they introduced that because I know which organisation.
Okay.
You're talking about.
Yeah. So that seemed a bit extreme. But,
a lot. I think some places as well will ask you to submit a lot of stuff. When I was looking for jobs a few years ago, I was applying to different universities. And for those ones, you had to submit an entire semester plan, an essay of your teaching philosophy, another essay about how you would improve the English education of this program. So you had to go and research it and that kind of thing. And I applied to 20 places, so I had to make 20 of these.
Yeah.
And and I didn't get any of them.
Oh,
so
really?
yeah. So I think even before the interview, there's quite often other stuff you have to do.
Yeah, definitely.
Turning it the other way, I've never been an interviewer, other than this podcast, but that's a bit different. But I've never been interviewing someone for a job.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder, not in every case, but sometimes it's hard to know, do they want somebody that will fit in? Do they want somebody who shows an understanding of the program they're going into? Are they looking for new and exciting teachers that they can mould stuff around? I know it's hard to know sometimes what they want out of us as well on the other side of the fence, I guess.
Yeah, I mean that issue. I imagine the answer is it depends.
Yeah,
it depends on the institution and the position they're hiring for. But also that brings up the issue of how far do you, if you do get a sense that they want somebody who fits a certain profile, and you maybe feel like you don't quite fit that profile, how far do you adjust who you are to fit that?
Yeah.
Depends how desperate you are for a job, I guess.
Yeah. Also depends how capable you are of adjusting yourself.
Yeah.
Some people are more than better about than others.
But on the same thing, though, I think questions that interviewees ask to the interviewer are probably for me, I think, are the most important thing of the whole interview.
Okay.
The questions that you prepare in advance and ask.
So you've done a bit of research, what they're...
Yeah.
Do you have any that you keep in your back pocket?
Well, like Rob said, do a bit of background research and then basically just pick out something. Your X institution does this, and then just ask a question related to it. Usually, can you tell me more about?
Yeah.
I'm interested about insert whatever.
What's the stupidest question you've ever been asked in a job interview, or the least relevant? Or asked.
The stupidest question I've been asked. The worst interview is barely. I have two really bad. They weren't bad. It was clear to me early on, that it wasn't going to be a good fit. But one was on a above a shop on Oxford Street.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a couple of guys like unpacking some boxes, and they told me to sit down somewhere, and they chatted to me a little bit about my CV. And then at the end they said, yeah, I mean after 10 minutes they said, probably you won't have to actually do any teaching. Most of the time students don't show up, they just sign up to get the visa, so you'll have to come here, you'll have to show up, but you don't have to stay or actually teach. So, okay, fair enough. Very honest.
At least they're up front.
Yeah. And the other one was when I first moved to Japan, I took like a 30-minute train ride out to somewhere in the countryside in Aichi, I don't know where I was. And the guy met me at the station in his car and drove me to a coffee shop and chain smoked in front of me while he told me all about his school. And then at the end said, like, do you want a job?
Okay. It's not bad.
I guess. I mean, I knew what my answer was. But that kind of brings me on to the next topic I want to talk about, which is professionalism. Both for the candidate and for the interviewer.
Yeah.
Do you... I mean, I guess, and it's connected to a lot of things, but do you find do you overcompensate, or not overcompensate, but do you try to try to wow them with your professionalism and your the way you dress, the way you act?
I don't know how you wow someone with professionalism, if you see what I mean. Like what
I
do you
mean,
mean
making that kind of extra effort to seem,
I wear a suit.
Okay. Well, no, that's something already. Not everybody does.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so in my job interviews, I always wear a suit.
Mm-hmm.
I always, as you said, I always do some research about the place.
Yep.
And I think I'm good at answering questions. Without any preparation and giving like quite good answers. I think because I went through a period of like looking for lots of different jobs and not getting them, I'm quite good at just reeling off answers to the kind of standard questions you get. So that's the kind of thing that I like to do. Being able to reference theory and stuff is quite good.
Yeah.
And also hiding my main interest, which a lot of jobs don't take. They don't take very kindly to. Like critical ELT stuff.
Ah, right.
They're not interested.
Horror movies from the 80s.
No, bring that up.
Yeah, right.
I don't really. Yeah, I think you can have the appearance of professionalism, but like if you're a good candidate, that will show. I guess.
Yeah.
Anyway, that will kind of show through, and also like I think the more experience people get, the more you have a sense of who you are as a teacher.
Yeah.
So you don't really need to change who you are.
Right.
Like if they don't employ me, I kind of think, well, it's their loss. I had that happened to a mutual friend of ours recently, and I remember him saying he didn't get the job he kind of wanted at the time, but then he said, well, if they're not prepared to take on what I was offering, then that's not the place for me. So I kind of think like you know what you're offering.
Yeah, I think that's generally
true. You set your shop front out. If they don't want it, then.
Yeah. But again, it depends how desperate you are for a job.
Right.
And I completely agree with that. I've been in the situation which I feel is the one sort of small exception to that, where I went and interviewed at a very small language school in London, and they didn't call me back. And for some reason, I had a strange feeling about this school, and I emailed them and pestered them for the next few weeks, and eventually something became available and they offered me the job. And I stayed there for 6 years. I became the director of studies and met a lot of good friends there and became a kind of important part of my professional development. And I often think back and like, what made me kind of pursue that job and not just let it go? And I think that was a rare case where I think they didn't make the right decision at first.
I think changing the subject slightly, I think the job interviews, any sort of transcript of a job interview would make for a really interesting research project. Like the way that teachers talk about themselves.
Yep.
Like I mean,
definitely.
the way that employers ask the questions they ask of teachers. I think you could do a whole PhD project.
Yeah, definitely. If you could get access to that data.
Yeah.
Ken Hyland has done some work on that. He's got a book called Disciplinary Identities, and it's examining things like scholars' websites and things. So it's like, how do they portray themselves as researchers and as people and that kind of thing. So there is a bit of work about that, but I don't think specifically about job interviews.
Yeah, but that would be interesting. I mean, the only other area which I think, which I know like a former colleague of mine is interested in doing research on, in terms of interviews, is from the interviewer's side of things, is looking at the interview process as a type of assessment, as like an assessment tool, the list of questions, etc.
Yeah.
I mean, how scientific do you think you can make an interview?
That's a very good question. I mean, You mean in terms of
how much could you have
to assessment or
assessment
tool?
How much could you? To what extent could you make a standardized interview which would be suitable for assessing everyone in a particular context?
That's not super not incredibly standardized. I think it can be more or less standard. I think something can be very loose and very subjective, and you can make something which is much less subjective, especially when there are multiple assessors involved. And kind of by refining the process, but obviously there's always going to be a lot of variables. But I think it's similar to assessing students' spoken output.
I think that kind of thing is less important with our kind of job. But with say you had a Wall Street trading position, you can basically look at you just basically base your employment decision on numbers alone and facts alone. It doesn't really matter about the person. It just matters about kind of the numbers behind them, I guess.
Their output.
Maybe.
So that's kind of scientific in that sense. And I guess finding the applicants has probably certain algorithms, and they kind of find people in that.
But I mean, you could say the same thing, and I don't think it would work. You could say, in theory, you could say the same thing about an IELTS teacher and say, just look at their IELTS, at their students' results, which wouldn't necessarily be a fair indication of how they teach.
Yeah, and then it gets much more fuzzy for just general teachers.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay, well that is this episode's TEFL culture.
Interesting to talk about. Thank you very much for listening.
If you'd like to get in contact with us, as usual, you can email us at TEFLology@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter @TEFLology. You can like our Facebook page, which is just the TEFLology Podcast on Facebook. And as usual, rate and review us on iTunes or whatever platform you use to download or stream this or whatever. So, thanks for listening. It's goodbye from me.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.